we're going to add a Bucher heat exchanger to a hydraulic power unit. These heat exchangers are designed specifically to fit the Bucher hydraulic power units to reduce heat buildup during high duty cycles. By maintaining lower oil temperature, hydraulic fluid lasts longer and components work more effectively, having a higher life expectancy. All brackets and hardware are included for mounting to the HPU motor. A few notes before we get started. This installation is specific for the power unit and the heat exchanger we are using, so be sure to check the instructions that came with your heat exchanger because the installation varies a bit between models. The heat exchanger core uses copper tubing, so the inlet and outlet ports must be held with a wrench when these fittings are tightened. The barb fittings have swivel ends, so ensure the hoses do not rotate when tightening, as this may kink the hoses, causing excessive back pressure. SAE fittings use O-rings to seal, so do not over-tighten. Before the heat exchanger can be installed, the path of fluid through the return filter manifold must be modified. Unscrew the filler breather cap from the reservoir and set it aside. Then loosen the 4 socket head screws holding the filter manifold to the base manifold and remove the filter assembly. Notice the absorbent pad. Even though we have not run this unit, there's still oil in the filter assembly from the factory test. And yes, I found out the hard way. Plug this outlet on the base manifold with the included 1/2-inch NPT plug as shown, ensuring that the O-ring around this passage remains in place. At this point, we went out of order from the instructions. We replaced the filter manifold, then proceeded with the next steps. You can do it either way. Ensure that all the O-rings are in place on the base manifold and reinstall the return filter manifold assembly to the base manifold. Snug up the 4 socket head cap screws, then torque to 9 foot-pounds. Reinstall the filler breather cap. Next, remove this number 10 SAE plug from the rear port of the base manifold and install this included 90-degree elbow. Position the elbow to point up and tighten the lock nut. Remove the number 12 SAE plug from the adapter in the filter manifold return port and install the other included 90-degree elbow and position the elbow pointing up as well and tighten the lock nut. Now we'll install the heat exchanger. Install the heat exchanger bracket to the motor using the 4 included 1.5-inch long bolts, washers, and nuts, but leave these slightly loose to allow alignment of the bracket and heat exchanger. This rubber gasket needs to be attached to the heat exchanger housing opening. You may need to cut off some excess. Then position the heat exchanger on top of the electric motor and install 2 1-inch long bolts, washers, and nuts to secure the heat exchanger to the bracket and leave slightly loose to allow for alignment. Now, align the bracket and heat exchanger on top of the motor so that the heat exchanger sits level on the fan shroud of the motor. There should be no gaps between the rubber gasket and the fan shroud. Snug up, then tighten the 6 sets of nuts and bolts, securing the heat exchanger and bracket. Install this 90-degree elbow into the inlet of the heat exchanger and position so it points out the right end. Again, the heat exchanger core uses copper tubing, so the inlet and outlet ports must be held with a wrench when fittings are tight. Install the straight fitting into the outlet port of the heat exchanger. And again, be sure to hold the heat exchanger fitting with a wrench. This 1/2-inch hose needs to be cut into 2 16-inch pieces and installed by placing the hex end of the fitting against a flat surface and pushing the hose over the barb until the end of the hose meets this yellow plastic ring near the hex. Install 1 hose assembly between the base manifold and the heat exchanger inlet. And the second hose between the heat exchanger outlet and the return filter manifold inlet as shown. Then tighten all 4 hose ends, making sure to hold the fittings at the heat exchanger with a wrench to avoid damage to the copper heat exchanger connections. So that's all there is to it. Now it just needs to be run to check for leaks. Speaking of leaks, you may have wondered about the barb fitting use. None of the components in this system will be exposed to high pressure. We're only dealing with a filter circuit, which operates at about 15 psi. Find hydraulic components for your system here. See our award-winning tech support options here, and subscribe to be notified of new products and solutions.